Hello everyone, welcome to the lecture of Psychology of Queues. In this lecture, we're going to have different modules covering different topics. In the first module, we're going to introduce the queues. Queues are everywhere in our daily lives. Visible queues are the ones that we can observe. They are visible queues of people. For example, in airport, there are queues of security checking and queues of boarding. In amusement parks, such as Disney World or Universal Studio, hundreds of people waiting in queues for their favorite rides. There are also queues for items. In factory, for example, the processing line can be viewed as a queue of unfinished parts waiting to be processed by workers or machines. In post office, as online shopping becomes more and more popular, there are hundreds of packages and mails waiting to be delivered to us. The invisible queues, on the other hand, are the queues that we cannot see. They are invisible queues of people at call centers. When we call our bank or customer service, it's more than likely that our call will be put on hold. In this case, we cannot see the queue, nor can we infer how they manage such queues. Similarly, when we submit our tax return, some of us wait for weeks, some of us wait for months. Again, we cannot infer how IRS agents manage such tax returns. For items, the most common invisible item is data. When we wrong program our computer, the tasks form a queue waiting to be processed by the CPU. When we download movies, documents, or video games, the data also lines up, waiting for transmission. We've talked about visible and invisible queues. Let's look at a hybrid queue. This queue is almost invisible. However, the sleepers on the ground give it away. We don't like queues. It's a waste of our time, makes us feel powerless, anxious, stressful, and many other negative feelings. Let's look more detailedly at why we don't like queues. Well, first of all, queues can be very costly. According to a study from Click Software, for each US employee, a total of 30.8 hours are wasted by waiting in queues every year. If we multiply that by the average hourly wage and by the total number of US employed people, we get an astonishing waste of $108 billion as our cost of waiting in queues every year. If we add this to the cost of employers, which is 20% more salary cost, we get around $240 billion. This is more than the total asset value of Amazon. So we are wasting the Amazon every year. Moreover, cost of queue can be more than just the cost of wasted waiting times. It also has some long-term effects. For example, in Britain, the retailers are reported to lose more than £12 billion, which is more than $15 billion due to waiting. Because if customers wait for too long, they might leave for the competitor companies or simply abandon without buying anything. According to a survey, 2/3 of customers have abandoned the purchase and left the store due to waiting, and only 22% of them will return. Imagine if we wait for dinner at a restaurant for more than 2 hours. It's very likely that we are not going to eat there again. This loss in sale is an important reason of why companies trying to avoid customer waiting, and why we need to study queuing psychology to improve the waiting experience. Well, let's also look at what's our tolerance of waiting. Is it minutes? It's reported that 73% of customers will abandon the retail queue if they wait for just more than 5 minutes. Or is it seconds? According to a survey, 40% of people will abandon a website that takes more than 3 seconds to load. Or is it even shorter than second? According to a study, Google will lose 20% of their traffic for every additional 100 milliseconds it takes for a page to load. Well, it turns out we're much less tolerant to waiting than we thought. And thus, we need to try very hard to avoid the loss of sale due to waiting. Sometimes, the cost of queue can be more than just money. In California, the median waiting time for emergency room is more than 5.5 hours. Patients with critical conditions are likely to deteriorate or even die due to waiting. In the COVID-19 pandemic, limited medical resources forced the patients who contract the virus to wait for treatment, which causes high fatality rate at some places. However, queues can also be good. First of all, queues serve as a free advertisement. In China and Japan, bubble teas are so popular that customers wait for up to 7 hours for a cup of bubble tea. We can also see such queue here, when new iPhone came out several years ago or during Black Friday sales. When we see a long queue, we intuitively think that the product quality or discount level is worth the wait. Some companies realize this and try to take use of it. Master Bao, for example, a pretty famous Chinese bakery, got caught hiring 70 people to stay in queue during open hours to make it look more popular. There are even new business model called show agent that help hire people to popularize queues. According to the show agent manager, for new businesses, if they have a long queue every day for 10 days, those places will be so popular afterwards that their initial spending on hiring shoes can be easily recovered. This is how powerful queues can be when used as a signal of quality. Secondly, customers may buy more during waiting. Remember when we check out in a grocery store? We just naturally grab some candies, gums, or chocolate bars. This is called impulse buying, and the impulse items like gums or magazines are deliberately placed there to attract us. Do you know how smartphones and gums are related? These two objects seem to be relevant. However, the sale of gum and magazines are hurt by this popularization of smartphones, as more people tend to just stare at their phones and become so-called mobile blinders and not even look at the impulse items. Moreover, because we hate waiting, some companies let us wait less by paying more. Airline companies, for example, have priority boarding and security checking queues. They intentionally show the queues to us to encourage us to purchase a priority, and they profit a lot from this. A new form of business models emerges based on our hate towards waiting, the line sitters. Same old line dudes. A new startup company in New York City hires professional line sitters to sit in queue for customers to buy Broadway tickets, newly released shoes, or restaurants. In fact, there are a bunch of similar line sitting service providers across the country. Some of them have their own specific specializations. For example, NQ sit in the IRS call center queue for tax professionals to save their times. To sum up, although customer hates waiting, companies can sometimes benefit from queues. We've talked about queues. Invisible queues and visible queues. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. So what exactly is a queue? Queues has two components. Jobs. They can be items or people. They arrive at the server and form the queue. Servers also can be people or machines. They process the jobs. These servers and jobs form the queue. Queues, in most cases, means waiting. And we really hate waiting. Luckily, we have queuing management tools to help us. On one hand, we can directly reduce the waiting time using queuing theory. However, for some cases, this might not be possible or too expensive. Thus, on the other hand, we can use queuing psychology to improve the waiting experience. Queuing theory is a research field where scientists analyze the queuing performance in a mathematical way. Look at this formula. This is Erlang's C formula that calculates the probability of an arriving customer will need to wait in queue. Looks intimidating? Don't worry. In this lecture, we won't be looking at those. We are going to talk about the queuing psychology that focus on improving the waiting as an experience. So why do we say waiting is an experience? turns out when all men are created equal, waiting times are not. We perceive time passage differently under different scenarios. Let me explain this using a simple example of us waiting for 5 minutes at a bus stop. In the first scenario, we have an exam starting at 9, and the bus is late. It's already 8:55. We feel stressful and worry about being late or even fail the exam. In this case, waiting for 5 minutes may feel like years to us. On the other hand, it's just 8:35. 5 minutes waiting probably mean nothing to us. This is how our perceived waiting time depends on our emotions or our anxiety level. In the second scenario, consider wait for 5 minutes in a sunny day. Now comparing that with wait for 5 minutes under a thunderstorm. We might get wet or even get sick due to that. 5 minutes may feel much longer in this case. This is how our waiting experience depends on the environment. Now, instead of wait for bus, wait for flight. In this case, waiting for 5 minutes for a flight probably means nothing to us. In this case, our waiting experience also depends on the value of service. From the previous examples, we can see that our waiting experience depends on different factors. So how do we take use of it to improve the customer satisfaction? In this lecture, we are going to use queuing psychology to interact with all the factors in our brain that affect the waiting experience and improve the customer satisfaction. To sum up, in this module, we talk about queues, visible queues and invisible queues, when they are good and why they are bad. We also talk about components of queues and waiting as an experience, so we can use queuing psychology to deal with the waiting. The structure of this lecture is as follows. In this module, we introduce queue and queuing psychology. In the other modules, we're going to talk about principles of psychology of queue. Thank you for listening. See you again in the next module.